Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. The continued fallout from Alicia Baumgardner's positive anti-doping test. Elham Mekhaled, who shared the ring with her, stated, "Let's not pass judgment until we know all of the facts first." This is a different tune she's singing now to the one she was singing when that news first broke.
When the news first broke, she was one of the many that was laying into Alicia Baumgardner. Now she seems to be more reserved. No idea what could have caused this change of heart.
Former WBA champion Hyun-Mi Choi is not being as diplomatic, saying athletes who take banned substances should be punished with utmost severity. This sort of behavior is not only a disgrace to our sport, but also to the belt. Hyun-Mi Choi has since ended her stint as a champion in recess. She was in action a few weeks ago opposite the ring former champion of Argentina, Maria Moderna, and currently she is the mandatory challenger to the WBA title.
More pressing matter, how will the sanctioning bodies choose to act moving forward? Will the WBA so decide to strip Alicia Baumgardner of the WBA title? Because if they do, it's conceivable that Hyun-Mi Choi will be elevated to full champion.
I remember after Franchon Cruz shared the ring with Alejandra Jimenez and was subsequently beaten by Alejandra Jimenez, news broke that Alejandra, like Alicia, had banned substances in her system. And as a result of that, the win over Franchon, that was overturned.
I think they ruled it a no contest.
And the belts that Alejandra had won from Franchon were returned to Franchon. In this situation with Alicia Baumgardner,
the WBA title may be returned to Hyun-Mi Choi if the WBA so decide to strip Alicia of their alphabet title. And not just the WBA, we also have to wonder what's going to happen with the WBC, the WBO, and the IBF.
Again, it's conceivable that the WBA title, it may go to Hyun-Mi Choi, and she might have to defend it against their number one contender, Ramona Graf of Germany. That's by way of the WBA. By way of the WBO, former WBC lightweight champion of Belgium, Delphine Persoon, is ranked at number one by way of the WBO, the WBC, and the IBF.
It's an inconvenient truth for Alicia Baumgardner that every single one of the alphabet titles she holds may soon become vacant based on how the sanctioning bodies choose to act at a time when the sport is rife with doping scandals.
Her own scandal amplified by her own success so far, the profile she's amassed and how she's endeared herself to the fans, become well known in the boxing community. It only makes the scandal that much bigger, that much worse.
Consider that when Zolani Tete popped hot, nobody cared.
Zolani Tete.
They didn't have the reaction to that news
Zolani Tete.
that they are now having to this news when both Alberto Puello and Michelle Rivera tested positive for banned substance. Nobody lost their minds about it. Nobody gave that the energy that they are now giving this scandal, this situation.
What normally happens in these situations is the sanctioning bodies might issue out something like a year ban, a year reduced down to 6 months if the fighter in question cooperates with an investigation.
I mean, that is how I've seen these situations handled, more or less, in the past. I don't know if here and now that's the same way the sanctioning bodies are going to handle this situation, or will they choose to try and make an example out of Alicia, issue out a harsher punishment than what we're used to seeing? I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how she means to defend herself.
I don't know if Matchroom is going to stand by her. The story was she was coming up on the end of her contract.
I don't know what her defense is going to be, how she means to defend herself from all of this. She's issued out a public statement stating that she is innocent, that she did not take any banned substances. It goes against everything she stands for, goes against her character, but we've seen that before.
Heard that before.
Won't jump to conclusions in addressing this latest anti-doping fiasco, all I can do is look at the ranks, look at the landscape, and it seems to me that Hyun Mi Choi and Delphine Persoon are in a pole position to become champions again if Alicia is stripped. How Alicia means to combat this scandal, your guess is as good as mine. Men's cruiserweight news, we now know more about who it is Zurdo is going to be fighting. Gilberto Ramirez versus Joe Smith Jr. nearly done for October 7th to Zone to stream cruiserweight fight.
A few weeks ago, news broke that Zurdo Ramirez would be moving up to cruiserweight in his very next fight, and I half expected his next opponent to be Sergey Kovalev because the word was he would be facing a known fighter and a former champion.
He's facing Joe Smith Jr. instead. I take no issue with this match. The two former world champions coming off of losses and long layoffs have agreed to fight each other next. BoxingScene.com has confirmed that Gilberto Ramirez and Joe Smith Jr. will meet October 7th in Las Vegas. DAZN will stream their cruiserweight bout from the Chelsea, a cozy venue inside of the Cosmopolitan in Las Vegas. The deal for Ramirez versus Smith isn't finalized in part because the two sides have yet to settle on a catchweight, somewhere below the cruiserweight limit of 200 pounds. That detail is not expected to hold up their deal. However, both Ramirez and Smith are on board with a contract weight somewhere in the 190s.
I like the fight.
Pressure fighter versus pressure fighter. A few differences aside, that Zurdo is a southpaw, whereas Joe, he's an orthodox fighter. That Zurdo is more the combination puncher of the two and exhibits better variety than Joe does, but Joe, he's very strong, and at least in the past, he's proven to be quite durable. Coming right off that knockout loss to Artur Beterbiev, we have to question as to whether or not he'll have the same punch resistance he had at light heavyweight up there at cruiser.
He'd be as durable.
I think it would have been a lot worse for Joe if the contest with Artur...
Cruiserweight, having not fought in over a year's time. How will Zurdo fare?
Zurdo, he didn't get knocked out in his last fight like Joe did. In truth, Zurdo's never been knocked out. But he did get demoralized. He did get outclassed. Fight with Joe Smith Jr. and Zurdo Ramirez won't be a fight of finesse. That's pressure fighter versus pressure fighter. That's what that is.
Seeing the previous cycle of light heavyweights making their way up to cruiserweight in Zurdo Ramirez and Joe Smith Jr. Earlier this week, I heard that U.S. Olympian Marcus Brown of Staten Island, he's going to be moving up to cruiserweight as well. And beyond the Callum Smith fight, if Artur Beterbiev is successful in defending his 3 alphabet titles, I get the sense he's not going to stick around at light heavyweight anymore. I get the sense that he, like those fighters, might end up moving up.
Badu Jack did in his late 30s, and he ended up becoming a champion there, winning the WBC title from long-reigning WBC champion Lunga Makabu.
Jack is currently on track to face Bridgerweight champion, WBC Bridgerweight champion of Poland, Lukas Rozensky, over there in Saudi Arabia.
And you figure, Badu Jack, that was never known as being all that big a puncher at super middleweight or light heavyweight, if he can move up to cruiser in his late 30s and win a title there, then surely Zurdo Ramirez and Joe Smith Jr., maybe Artur Beterbiev, maybe they can win a title up there as well.
Jack did.
Zurdo Ramirez and Joe Smith Jr. are younger fighters than Badu Jack. I think Badu Jack's in his 40s now, whereas Zurdo and Joe, they're in their early 30s.
Adds to the spice. The number of familiar faces that we could see campaigning as cruiserweights moving forward.
As the men's light heavyweight division continues to cool down, I'm not optimistic we'll see an undisputed champion crowned at light heavyweight, what is supposed to be the fight between Artur and Dimitri. Dimitri still hasn't fought this year.
After what was the biggest year of his boxing career, the high-profile win over Canelo and the dominant win over Zurdo, this year is nowhere near as productive. It hasn't been for Bivol as last year was.
And as stated, I'm not optimistic that we get the fight between him and Artur Beterbiev. I'm convinced that if Artur is successful against Callum, he might make a decision to move up in weight because he's getting long in the tooth, and I don't imagine continually making light heavyweight has become easier to do over time.
Might go up there to cruiser.
Like Joe Smith and Zurdo Ramirez, this fight is not reported to be a title fight at this time, but the winner of the fight may find themselves in line to fight for one.
We'll talk more about the fight once it's made official.
Downstairs at super middleweight, Floyd Mayweather defends Canelo Alvarez from cherry-picking accusations. You proved yourself already. A sentiment I often express here on this channel, that the people criticizing Canelo Alvarez often elevate less accomplished, less proven fighters to pedestals
while tearing down Canelo.
Most recently, the 33-year-old was lambasted for choosing to face Jermell Charlo, a fighter who campaigns 2 weight divisions below him. Mayweather, after taking countless arrows, notices that Alvarez is being given the same treatment that he used to get. Although they haven't always been the closest of friends, the former 5-division champion admits that Alvarez has already demonstrated his greatness over and over again. "You proved yourself already," Mayweather told Fight Hype. "You proved yourself."
The same people criticizing Canelo for fighting Jermell, who does campaign 2 divisions south of super middle, are the same people who were praising Errol Spence for fighting Mikey Garcia,
who at that time was campaigning 2 divisions south of welter, 2 divisions south of welterweight. His last fight before the Spence fight was the Robert Easter unification match at lightweight. After winning that fight, he jumps up 2 weight classes, fights Errol Spence Jr. at 147, and Spence...
They applauded him for it. They praised him.
Remember that he put the Terrence Crawford unification match on the back burner to fight the likes of Mikey Garcia, a fighter who campaigned 2 divisions south of where he campaigned, so they can turn around all these years later and start clutching at their pearls that Canelo is essentially doing the same thing.
The difference being that Canelo Alvarez is far by and large more accomplished now than Spence was when he fought Mikey.
It's not even close. Canelo is a 4-division, 2-time lineal, 2-time Ring Magazine, former undisputed 4-division champion.
You were okay with Spence fighting Mikey, but you're not okay with Canelo fighting Charlo? I thought you wanted him to fight Charlo. Aren't you the guys who were accusing Canelo of ducking slick black fighters?
They've been saying for the last 3 or 4 years, so that when Canelo finally buckles down and fights one of these guys they're talking about, they can throw their toys out of the pram. In truth, they're never going to be satisfied. They're never going to be happy.
They're afraid.
The emotional investment that they have in Al Heyman's PBC and Al Heyman's PBC fighters.
They're afraid.
And I don't even think Jermell Charlo is a bad fighter. Quite the opposite. I think he's one of the better fighters the PBC has ever produced. But these guys are afraid because they don't want to see happen to Jermell what happened to Wilder at the hands of Tyson Fury, what happened to Stephen Fulton at the hands of Naoya Inoue, what happened to Errol Spence Jr. at the hands of Terrence Crawford. That more often than not, when you let the PBC guys fight somebody that ain't a PBC fighter, they tend to lose.
Exposing Al Heyman's inability to really groom and develop top-level, top-shelf fighters. They take that personal.
That Al Heyman, given his background in the music industry, he knows more about branding gimmicks and building brands than building fighters, because whenever he lets some kid from some other side of the street play with his boys, they tend to lose.
That scares these guys.
Exposing their brazen hypocrisy, criticizing Canelo for fighting Jermell, who fights 2 divisions south of where he fights, when you were okay with Errol Spence fighting Mikey Garcia.
Fought 2 divisions south of where Spence fought.
Errol Spence Jr.'s noticeable height and reach advantage over Mikey Garcia. That's not the case when it comes to Canelo and Jermell. Jermell is actually the taller, longer fighter. He's not a little guy the way that Mikey was a little guy going into the Spence fight. Once again, the brazen hypocrisy from the usual suspects, Canelo's Boo Birds. At the age of 33, most fighters would be considered in their physical prime. In the case of Alvarez, however, with over 60 pro fights under his belt and nearly 20 years of experience, many are of the belief that he's lost a step or 2. From Mayweather's point of view, he doesn't see any slippage. Just an all-time great fighter who's already stamped himself as one of the best ever. You fought a lot of great fighters. You tested yourself. You won up numerous weight classes. Canelo is a great fighter.
Why is Floyd all of a sudden singing his praises when not that long ago he was trashing him?
Immediately after the Caleb Plant fight over a year ago, what was Canelo's undisputed title fight at super middleweight that saw him crowned an undisputed champion, you saw Floyd Mayweather quite randomly laying into Canelo Alvarez.
Trashing him, tearing him down.
Immediately after the Caleb Plant fight, even though Canelo looked sensational in that fight, stopping Caleb Plant the way that he did, did, that highlight reel knockout, Floyd took it upon himself immediately after that fight to tear him down so that over a year later he can give him his flowers and sing his praises. What changed between then and now?
No.
I'll tell you what changed between then and now. Now, unlike then, Canelo has made a decision to sign a multi-fight agreement with the PBC, whereas before, after the Caleb Plant fight, that was a one-and-done situation. In spite of the PBC's efforts to keep Canelo Alvarez on board, they offered him a multi-fight deal then, but he didn't bite. He didn't take it, whereas this time he did.
That's why Floyd's not trashing him.
Floyd is just as invested in the PBC's continued success as Al Heyman. And with Canelo Alvarez on your side, you can sell far more pay-per-views than you could without him. What fight were you going to put Jermell Charlo in that stood a legitimate chance of selling 800,000 pay-per-view buys or better? Remember, with Caleb Plant, Canelo sold 800,000 pay-per-view buys. What could he do with Jermell? The same or better.
That's why Floyd's not tearing him down anymore. Even if I agree with what Floyd is saying, why he's saying it is where we differ. He's only saying it because Canelo jumped on board.
I reiterate, what fight were you going to put Jermell Charlo in that stood a legitimate chance of selling 800,000 pay-per-view buys or better? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what about the Crawford fight? Need I remind you that Spence versus Crawford, successful fight that it might have been, brought in less at the box office than Canelo versus Plant.
And that fight was built up over 5 years.
Spence versus Crawford, great fight that it might have been, successful fight that it might have been, only brought in somewhere in between 650 and 675,000 pay-per-view buys. Canelo versus Plant brought in more than that, 800,000.
So Floyd's gonna play nice now. He's gonna sing Canelo's praises.
Because he knows, like I know, like you know, that there wasn't another fight you could put Jermell Charlo in that would have had the earning power of a Canelo fight, and the same applies to his brother Jamal, or the winner of Benavidez versus Andre.
Canelo is an asset, and the PBC needs him.
Could have did a round robin with every single one of those guys, and it wouldn't do what it can do if you involve Canelo. So Floyd knows that, and Floyd's gonna play nice. He's gonna give Canelo his flowers.
That's why he's not tearing him down anymore.
Because they need him.